Hi, everyone. My name's Alex. I am a member of HACYPAA. I'm the co-chair of HACYPAA. HACYPAA stands for Harlan Area Conference for Young People of AA. We're all the way from up here in Minnesota. I'm in St. Paul, all the way down to Texas. And it's a great honor to be here. I appreciate you guys asking me to speak. Little housekeeping. I got sober, or let me see, my sobriety date is April 17th of 2023. I'm an active member of AA. I have a sponsor. He knows he's my sponsor, and I sponsor other men in AA. Yeah, I think I'll start a little bit with I always kind of like to start with my childhood, just because, um, like so many of us, there are underlying issues as to why I turned to alcohol and other outside issues as a solution. Um, my parents split up when I was about 3 years old, and my mom moved to Chicago, and my dad stayed in St. Louis, Missouri, where um, I was originally born. And they really had a contentious divorce. They fought like cats and dogs for most of my life. I find this really important to my story because something that I learned at a very early age was how to lie. Um, I was caught in between them. My older brother and I were both caught in between them. We were in the middle of two parents that did not get along. And my way of coping with that at an early age was learning how to lie, learning how to compartmentalize my life, um, getting the sense that I was less than, that my feelings weren't as important as those around me, right? As theirs, like their anger, their pain, their frustration, everything that they were going through was paramount to anything going on in my life, or so I understood. And I was just kind of like an unhappy lost kid coming up. And that's not to say that my parents didn't do the best that they could. They both loved me, and they both um, did the best that they could. And I wasn't stuck in an abusive household, physically or sexually, maybe emotionally, but I had it not as good as some, but not as bad as others, for sure. Um, and this went on until um, probably about high school, when I started to is when I started to really act out. But I picked up my first drink at 8 years old. My mom wasn't a drinker, but my dad was. And one thing that I really observed as a kid was like um, the idea of adults having fun and having a good time was like family parties, or when my dad entertained clients. And I remember as a little kid, like learning how to make dry martinis, right? For my dad and his party guests. It was like a really cool, like, party trick for my dad. Here's my 8-year-old. He can make an awesome dry martini, right? Um, and I love to eat the olives out of his martinis. So like that association with like having a good time, being social, um, that's kind of like when we gathered and were together, and when like people really weren't fighting, um, was when alcohol was involved. Um, my first drunk was at about 12. I think I was at a funeral or something, and sneaking Budweisers or something. Um, but I really started to drink heavily between eighth grade and high school. Um, and that's when I like felt like I could finally be myself. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't compartmentalizing. When I was drunk, um, I felt that relief. like so many of us. Fast forward through high school, I think about senior year, I found beginning of senior year, I found marijuana, and I quickly advanced into other harder outside issues, right? Um, by the time I was 20 years old, I was a full-blown heroin addict. And that was my solution. Drugs and alcohol was what made me feel connected to other people, being able to drink the hardest, or, I could chug beer the fastest or do all of those things. And yeah, it was something that was my identity. When I was real little, I always liked to cook because my mom was a single mom and I was home alone a lot. And um, even from being a little kid, like I'd make grilled cheese, it'd be like up the stovetop, it'd be like up at eye level, and I'd be making grilled cheeses like up here, right? Um, so as a young person, I really I wanted to be a chef. And I worked my way into, I got an opportunity at the age of 20 uh, to have a cooking position in my first like fine dining restaurant. For those of us who have been in the service industry, especially like fine dining or higher end cooking, um, we all know like it's very indicative of drugs and alcohol. It's a great environment to disappear into if you like to abuse substances. And as much as I had wanted to be like a chef and be a part of my life and was something I enjoyed and um, was something that I was actually good at, um, what I really loved the most about it is that the people around me drank and used like I wanted to drink and use. Um, Eventually, I ended up um, attempting suicide a few times. Um, so my answer was to like stop using heroin, but I didn't have a drinking problem because of heroin was my problem. I found out that I would jump from one thing to the next. So, of course, I replaced heroin with continued to use alcohol until I drank myself into a state of homelessness. And then I found AA for the first time. And I have to say, my first experience with AA was something that I was not ready for. I was about 22, or let me see, 23, 24 years old. And it's something that I did because others wanted me to do it. I wasn't prepared. And I faked my way through it, right? I heard that phrase from somebody, fake it until you make it. And I just ran with the fake it part. Because that's what I was good at. I was good at faking things. And I remember doing my first fourth and fifth step, and you know, I put stuff on there that like wasn't even true. Like I added stuff just because I would sit in those rooms and I would listen, and all I would hear were the differences between the people sharing and my story. I wasn't able to connect with those similarities, right? I was not open to a higher power. Um, I was not at all willing to admit that my life had become unmanageable, regardless of how many suicide attempts I'd had, how many times I'd been on the streets, no matter what, I was just unwilling. So I kind of white knuckled it for about a year, and I had picked up a drink again, and then slowly that spiraled. It took a while for me, but I spiraled back into daily drinking or using, and eventually until about 33, I had been suicidal for years. I had become an intravenous drug user. My life was in shambles, and yeah, I remember I overdosed for the first time, or not for the first time. I overdosed to a point for the first time where I probably should be dead. And I remember thinking that, um, I remember hearing about people who um, like attempt suicide, jump off a bridge, and as soon as they do that, they immediately regret it. Well, as I'm having my seizure, I don't like regret this happening, and I just remember begging my heart to stop. And for the next like 2 months, I purposefully overdosed multiple times a day to try and kill myself. And that brought me to an extensive state of psychosis and hallucination, where I hallucinated like my own death, right? Um, which was really important for me because I ended up in the emergency room in a state of psychosis on antipsychotics. I was 33 years old, and my parents had like gotten together and finally discussed things. And after like 30 years of fighting, they sat down and they told me, like, we've put our stuff aside. We're not going to fight anymore. In that state of mind, hearing that after like 30 years of like that being something that I wanted, I finally broke down and admitted to myself that I was out of control, that I needed help. And these were things like I knew cerebrally, like I'd said the words, I understood the fact that I was an addict and an alcoholic. But I had never really been honest with myself that I was powerless, that I had no control, that I needed someone else's help. And that sense of enlightenment was like my white light moment. That was my aha moment, right? Not everybody gets that, which I'm grateful for. I could explain it away as, some science thing. Of course, I'm sitting there in a state of psychosis, but I choose to see that as my higher power communicating with me. It's the time where I first really felt God in my life. And I chose to get help, to go to treatment. The social worker at the psych ward that I was locked in for the next week found me a place to go. I ended up at a place called The Retreat up here in the Twin Cities. It's a fantastic place. It is an AA immersion-based program rather than a clinical program. And the reason I did that was because it was the cheapest available option. Because like so many other alcoholics and addicts that I know, I had not bothered to pay for health insurance. That was too much money. It got in the way of my drinking use. And it was the best thing that could possibly have happened to me. Being immersed in AA and making that a huge part of my life was fantastic. I began to work the steps. I decided to stay in the Twin Cities for sober living. I've built a community up here. I've built a life for myself. I've come to know things in my life that I never ever thought that I would have. A belief in a higher power, um, happiness, hope, a future, um, honesty, credibility, reliability, and um, all of these things I can really contribute to the spiritual aspect of my life, my connection with my higher powers. For a long time, um, I could not imagine why anyone would believe in God. I did not agree with religion. I was very anti-religious for a long, I said for a long time before I got sober that I was agnostic, but I didn't really know the meaning of agnostic. Really, what I was I didn't believe in God, but I was afraid I was wrong. Right? That was my level of spirituality. There's a great part of We Agnostics that kind of like perfectly describes how I saw religion and God. I'm going to read it to you. It says, we were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon the world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance at many individuals who claimed to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet in other moments, we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made this all? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and seemed lost. Like, that was about perfectly describes how I saw religion and God. Um, and it took a while for me to understand my definition of a higher power. I had to break it down into simply there's just stuff beyond my control. I can't stop the sun from rising and setting. I can't stop the tides of the ocean. If I can't control those, why would I believe that I can control anything else, right? That's my higher power. Just that simple for me. Um, and once I was able to accept that, I began to receive the promises. I've got amazing things in my life. Um, I've got a new career. I've started to get into the medical field. I am a CNA now instead of a cook. I'm going to be going to nursing school. Right now, I'm getting a certification as a TMA, which for me is insane because that's a trained medication administrator, right? Like somebody is paying for me to go to a class to like pass out narcotics. Right? um, it's really surreal. I bought a new car. Like I have a great place to live, and I have an amazing fellowship. Um, and more than just the program, I found that that's incredibly important. Is finding some sort of life beyond just like working the steps and doing book work and doing all this, like finding ways to have fun and enjoy life beyond simply being in recovery. And YPAWs, the young people of AA organizations that I've gotten into, have been a huge part of that. We get together and dance and do goofy things and hang out and just like have a great time together. And while, you know, being sober, stuff that I never thought I could do. Um, so yeah, I think that's the next biggest part of my life is like maintaining that that extra part of my life, like actually living, right? I didn't get sober to just like go back to work and to just read the big book and sit around and like try and be sober all the time. Like that kind of sucks. I got sober to live, right? Um, and that's what I'm doing with my fellowship. So I see that I'm out of time, but if you have any interest in HACYPAAs, go check one out. There's a ton of them around. HACYPAA is going to be up here in the Twin Cities. It's going to be just outside of Minneapolis, Easter weekend. Thank you for having me, and I will pass. Oh yeah, and our topic is let's make it about fellowship outside of the program of AA or within the program of AA too.